The X-Men film franchise has been going strong since the incredible success of the first X-Men movie in the year 2000. 16 years later, and we're still getting new movies. And the downside to 16 years of sequels, prequels, spin-offs, and whatnot is that eventually you're gonna have some movies that people don't like. After the disappointing X-Men 3 and X-Men Origins Wolverine, Fox was left with one question: what now? Go back in time, of course. First Class was a prequel to the entire franchise, and it was an unexpected success. But where do you go from here? How do you fix past mistakes without simply rebooting the entire X-Men universe? This is what we're going to explore today. The X-Men movies are riddled with plot holes, and a prequel leading up to X-Men 1 through 3 would be next to impossible to make in terms of fitting all the puzzle pieces perfectly back together. Fox's answer? Time travel to erase previous events. For the most part, it works. It's not perfect by any means, but the X-Men movies now have two distinct histories. I'll do my best to put it all in perspective for you. Anyone that's familiar with time travel in comic books knows how crazy it can get. One change in history, and the ripples of change can affect entire unrelated events. Allegiances can change, events can happen out of order, history can literally be changed. To demonstrate all this, I'll give you a quick example. In the DC Comics universe, the Flash traveled back in time to the past to rescue his mother from being killed. This simple event causes the world's history to change. He comes back to a world where his mom is alive, but also one in which Bruce Wayne died, and his father became Batman.
I have to remember, it's me! It's Barry! Barry Allen!
Bruce!
Bruce!
Bruce is dead. I watched him die.
My God, he's the one who died that night in the alley. Bruce died, and you lived. You're his father. You're Thomas Wayne.
A world in which Superman isn't the hero the world loves, and Aquaman and Wonder Woman are at war, and the world is completely ruined, all from one simple change to the past.
Break the sound barrier and there's a sonic boom. You broke the time barrier, Flash, shifting everything just a tiny bit, enough for events to happen slightly differently.
The X-Men movies adopted the same idea, so let's start with the original timeline. It all starts with X-Men First Class. A young Magneto and Professor X form the X-Men, but eventually part ways, setting the stage for their future conflicts.
We want the same thing.
My friend, I'm sorry, but we do not.
In 1973, Mystique murders Bolivar Trask to avenge mutants that he experimented on to create the mutant-hunting Sentinel robots. This further fuels the government's fear of mutants. Now let's fast forward to the early 80s, and we've got X-Men Origins Wolverine. Wolverine gets drafted into the Weapon X program, he's given his metal skeleton, and faces off with this timeline's version of Deadpool, which was one of the worst things I've ever seen in any movie, by the way. After defeating him, Wolverine loses his memory from a gunshot and runs away. So sometime in the early 2000s, the first X-Men movie takes place. Wolverine meets the X-Men for the first time.
I'd like you to meet Aurora Monroe, also called Storm. This is Scott Summers, also called Cyclops.
Storm. What do they call you? Wheels? This is the stupidest thing I've ever heard.
He joins them and helps them stop Magneto from turning humans into mutants. Magneto gets put away in a plastic prison, and soon enough, we have X-Men 2. Mystique helps break Magneto out of his prison, and he tries once again to destroy all of humanity. They all end up at the Weapon X facility, and it gets destroyed. And we get our very first glimpse at Jean Grey's Phoenix powers. In X-Men 3, there's a cure for mutants that was developed, and Jean loses control of her powers and becomes Dark Phoenix. This causes the death of Cyclops, leader of the X-Men, and Magneto uses Jean to help him build an army of mutants. Wolverine is forced to kill Jean, and Magneto is stabbed with the cure, losing his powers.
One of them.
However, by the end they show his powers aren't completely gone, implying that the cure was only temporary. After these events, Wolverine leaves the X-Men, and then we get to the Wolverine. where he travels to Japan and faces off against the Silver Samurai. Now, the most important part for the timeline is at the end of the movie. Professor X has returned with the fully powered Magneto, and they warn Wolverine of a coming threat, and you get a glimpse of the Sentinels that Trask proposed back in the 1970s, before Mystique killed him.
Our dark forces, Wolverine, building a weapon that could bring about the end of our kind.
Deciding mutants are too big of a threat, the Sentinels are eventually activated. They also decided that humans are a threat and swiftly take over the world. Now, this is the future that the original timeline leads to. The original X-Men movies did not lead to a happy ending. It leads to the year 2023, where mutants are put into concentration camps or exterminated. The world is completely destroyed.
A world of war, suffering, loss on both sides. Mutants and the humans who dared to help them. Fighting an enemy we cannot defeat.
In this future, Kitty discovers that she can use her powers to send people back in time. So she sends Wolverine back in time to the period after First Class to 1973 to stop Mystique from ever killing Trask, to stop this timeline from ever happening. This is when Days of Future Past takes place. Mystique gets stopped from killing Trask, preventing the Sentinels from ever being made. This change created an entirely new timeline that's currently being explored in the movies. The events of X-Men Origins, all the way through the apocalyptic future of the Sentinels, have all been erased from history, and anything can happen now. None of this happened, from a story point of view, of course. Now that we have a new timeline to explore, the first story in this new timeline is in 1983, X-Men Apocalypse, where the X-Men face the first and oldest mutant, Apocalypse, and Jean discovers her hidden Phoenix powers much earlier in her life. Decades later, Deadpool takes place. And how do you know it takes place in the new timeline? Well, because we already had a version of Deadpool in the original one. This Deadpool is quite different.
You're about to be killed by a Zamboni! In 5 minutes!
No, please.
Oh God, I'm so sorry.
And we know it takes place in the X-Men universe because we see the X-Men mansion, and an older, more seasoned Colossus is in the movie. And we know it takes place in modern times for one reason. Negasonic Teenage Warhead is using a touchscreen phone and Twitter, so it has to take place in modern times.
Oh no, finish your tweet.
Years after this is when Wolverine wakes up in the future at the end of Days of Future Past, and sees the Sentinel future no longer happen, and an entirely new series of events happened instead. The world is saved, Cyclops and Jean are both alive. Is your head spinning yet?
The history I know is a little different.
You and I have a lot of catching up to do.
Yeah.
We know there's an upcoming movie called The New Mutants that will likely fall neatly after Apocalypse sometime, with a new team of mutants led by Magneto, if it follows the comic books. More than likely, all future X-Men movies are going to take place in this new timeline. As far as the X-Force movie in development and the new Wolverine movie in development, we don't know the details on where those take place yet. It might become even more confusing. Now, there are still some plot holes that the time travel did not fix. Couple examples here. Why is Emma Frost a grown woman in the 1960s during First Class, but just a kid in the early 80s during X-Men Origins Wolverine? Time travel doesn't explain this, because she was born before the period when time was changed. And we also see Moira in the 60s as a young woman, and in X-Men 3, she's barely aged a day, and it's been decades. And why is Trask a Caucasian midget in the 1970s, but an African American around the same age in X-Men 3? And Professor X said he met Magneto at age 17 in X-Men 1. That's not true. We saw when they met.
My name's Charles Xavier. You were in my head. How did you do that? You have your tricks, I have mine. I'm like you. Just calm your mind. I thought I was alone. You're not alone. Eric, you're not alone.
Clearly not 17 years old. These are the moments you have to remember that these are fictional movies, and sometimes writers mess up. and or hope that audiences don't remember little details like this. Let's see where this new timeline goes, and let's have some fun with it. I hope you guys really enjoyed this video and found it helpful and entertaining. To get it right, I had to look over all the movies, and it had my head spinning. So if you liked it, make sure you hit like, leave me a comment down below if you have any questions, or anything I might have missed. And remember to subscribe so you can keep up with all the content I upload for you guys. This is Fabian from GamerThumbTV. Till next time, guys.